Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's presentation. My name is Ingrid Parks, Project Manager with Spalding for Children, and before we get started, I'd like to review a few housekeeping details and let you know how you may participate during today's webinar. Our webinar is scheduled for approximately 1 hour and 30 minutes, and to eliminate background noise, all phone lines will be muted during the presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the QIC-AG website, www.qic-ag.org. An email notification will be posted on the QIC-AG website, notifying everyone when the recording is available. There will be an opportunity for Q&A at the conclusion of each presentation, and during the Q&A portion of our webinar, you may ask questions or submit comments by typing in the chat window, which is located in the lower left area of your screen. When you're finished typing, click on the send button to submit your questions and comments. For those who would like to speak directly with the presenters, you must join the audio portion of this webinar by calling 1-866-325-7968 and providing the conference ID 726-31629. The presenters for today's webinar are Melinda Liss, who's the Vice President of the Academy for Family Support and Preservation at Spalding for Children and the Director of the QIC-AG. We also have Elizabeth Richmond, who's an adoptive parent and co-chair of the Illinois Adoption Advisory Council and lead foster parent support specialist for the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. John Webb is joining us, who's the Site Implementation Manager for the New Jersey Department of Children and Families QIC-AG project. And Barbara Joyle is the System of Care Unit Director for the Family Services Division of the State of Vermont Department of Children and Families. I'd now like to introduce June Dorn, who's the National Adoption Specialist for the Children's Bureau and the Federal Project Officer for the QIC-AG.
Thank you, Ingrid. Good afternoon, everyone. I would just like to say welcome from the Children's Bureau to everyone participating today. I'd like to thank you for taking your time to participate in this Lessons Learned webinar of the Quality Improvement Center for Adoption and Guardianship. This is really exciting and innovative work that it's being developed through this grant. We trust that the nation will benefit from the resulting evidence-based adoption and post-adoption interventions that are being tested through the project's pilot sites. So thank you again for taking your time. I trust that you will find all of the information today to be worthwhile to your everyday work. And now I would like to turn this over to Melinda.
Thanks, June. Although some of you may already be familiar with the QIC-AG, I want to spend just a brief amount of time providing an overview of this initiative. This overview will help to build a foundation for the rest of the webinar. The QIC-AG has a cooperative agreement on this with the Children's Bureau for 5 years. We are about to enter our 3rd year. Actually, October 1 will be year 3 for the cooperative agreement. The cooperative agreement is with Spalding for Children, but there are many entities involved with the leadership team, and these entities are listed on the slide. The QIC-AG really has one large goal, but we've broken it out into several different areas here on this slide. And the first one is to implement evidence-based practices or develop and test promising practices in sites. And we have 2 of the sites on the call today who will be talking about what they will be implementing in their sites. The second part of the goal is to really take what we learned through these 8 partner sites and replicate the interventions across the country. Although we won't have time during the 5 years to actually complete the replication, we will lay the framework so that other sites will be able to take these interventions and replicate them in their own systems if they prove to be effective. And then lastly, we want to enhance the 8 partner sites continuum and improve services that they provide to adoptive and guardianship families. The QIC-AG has 2 target groups which are listed on this slide. The first target group 1, are children with challenging mental health, emotional, or behavioral issues. These are children who have not moved to permanence after the system has tried to do the normal things that are done in regards to permanence. They are still not moving to permanence. These children may have an identified permanent home, or they may not have an identified home. And so Target Group 1 is looking at how to help those children and the families move to permanence. Target Group 2 is looking at all children and families who have achieved permanence through adoption or guardianship. This includes intercountry and domestic private adoptions. As I mentioned earlier, the QIC-AG has 8 partner sites. These sites were selected during the first year of the cooperative agreement through a competitive process. The sites that are listed here on the slide are all of our partner sites, and as I mentioned, we are being joined today by both representatives from both New Jersey and Vermont. And this 6-minute video will provide you with an overview of the QIC-AG initiative, along with a compelling story as to why it's critical for services and support to be provided post-permanence for children and families who have adopted or obtained guardianship. Okay, I'm going to spend the next maybe 10 minutes walking through the QIC-AG Permanency Continuum Framework, which then the rest of our speakers will be highlighting how they're working on it, and Elizabeth will be highlighting the importance of that from the adoptive parent's perspective. We developed, the QIC-AG developed this continuum to guide our work. It provides a contextual framework for envisioning both pre- and post-permanency services. This slide shows what I call the 2 theories about pre- and post-permanency services. On the far left-hand corner is the first theory, which I call the bucket theory. And this is when you talk to somebody and you say, hey, do you have post-permanency services at your site? And they say yes, and then they'll name 1 or maybe 2 things. And it's really kind of the one-size-fits-all. The second theory here, which we're working with our 8 partner sites on developing, is the idea of the full continuum, which goes with the saying on this particular cover of the series, the end is just the beginning. And in child welfare in the 21st century, it really requires us to rethink permanence, both how we get families to move to permanence and how we support them after finalization. This slide shows our Permanency Continuum Framework. There are 8 intervals that are listed here. They serve as an organizing principle guiding the work of helping children transition to adoption or guardianship, and then helping them maintain stability and well-being after permanence. You'll see that there are 3 colors listed on this continuum: gray, green, and blue. The gray are things that we will not be covering today in our presentation, and our sites are actually not focusing on them either for their valuable interventions, but we have them on this continuum because we recognize the importance of them throughout the whole continuum. We will spend the majority of our time today focusing on the green and the blue intervals that are listed on here. So I'm going to start first with focused. Focused really is Target Group 1. And there are some practice principles here that I just want to highlight with focus. Focus is really about preparing families and developing their capacity. So again, to remind people with Target Group 1, these are children that are having difficulties moving to permanence for all sorts of reasons. It could be because of their complex or challenging mental health behavioral needs. It could be because of their age. It could be because of large sibling groups. So with these children, we want to really ensure that we're preparing the families where they feel comfortable that they're able to meet the needs now and in the future for these children. The second thing that we mention in this is that their recruitment, of course, is key anytime you're looking at focus. However, the recruitment here really has to be tailored to the needs of the child, because the needs of the child here are specific, and you need to find families who are able to meet the child's needs both now and also in the future. And then lastly, this particular interval is really looking at how you connect families to services in preparation for permanence. So it's almost setting up the families so that they can do well long after finalization. We have 2 sites that are focusing on the focused interval. that is Texas, and they're implementing the Pathways to Permanence 2 intervention, and Winnebago Tribe in Nebraska, which is implementing family group decision making. What you see on your slide right now is actually a poll. I'm going to ask everyone just to take a second to click on the appropriate response to your site. Your site can be defined any way that is best suits your situation. It could be a private agency, a public agency, a state, a county, a tribal child welfare system. But if you can look at the ratings here and just mark how well your site is doing in regards to provision of services and supports that fall into this focus interval. And I'll give people just a couple of minutes to enter those, or I'm sorry, a couple of seconds, and then we'll move to the results. Okay, so based on responses here, it seems as though the majority, 52% almost, see that their services are sufficient in regards to having these services and supports in place. And we'll be asking the same type of question as we move throughout the survey, so you'll be asked that question again. So then we're going to move to the post side of the continuum. And there are three intervals here, universal, selective, and indicated, that all fall under the prevention framework. And this is based on a health prevention model. And as the graphic shows on the slide, the intervention becomes, as the interventions become more intense, the population that needs the level of intervention decreases. However, the average degree of risk for discontinuity also increases at the same time. So research that was done in Illinois has shown that most families who've adopted or obtained guardianship are actually doing okay. However, it's important that systems have a full continuum so that when children and families do need the more intensive services, those are available for them. So the first interval I'm going to show here is universal on the post side, and universal is for all children and families. There's nothing intensive about universal. The services that fall here are proactive, they're meant to be engaging, and they're very critical because this is where it's key that the system tries to ensure that there's connection with the families so that we know that most families who move to adoption or guardianship are not going to need those level of service and support in the beginning. But there could become a time when they need to reach back, and based on the amount of universal interventions available, those families could be engaged already, very aware of the services and supports that are available to them. So under universal, these could include providing information on where to get help. This could include newsletters. It could include any kind of training that's offered to families, or even some type of peer support. The one thing I always like to mention with universal is that it's critical that a system can't have a really good universal interval put together on the system and then have no services to offer when the families come back. So it's a critical piece, but it also is important that the next intervals follow that. In universal, we have one site that's focusing on their valuable intervention, and that's Vermont. They are doing a universal outreach survey, and they will be talking, Barb will be talking about that later today. So we're going to do the other poll, another poll here. So just like before, if you can click on the response, this one now is about universal. How well your site, defined as how you want to define the site, has provision of services and supports in place that fall into the universal category. Okay, so based on results, people here feel like they actually proficient is higher here than it was for focus, but sufficient is the highest at 46% almost, with weak following at 38%. And we will make these results, if people are interested in getting the results afterwards, it's something that we can provide to you as well. So the next interval we're going to look at is selective. And a selective involves identifying risk factors at the time of finalization, and these risk factors could include things such as multiple placements, residential settings, age at the time of finalization, anything that could be a risk factor for potential discontinuity in the future. The key for selective is that you're going to target those risk factors and you're going to provide services to those families long before they have any type of trouble going on or any kind of problems that are taking place. So it's key in this particular interval that you're using the data at the time of finalization to really hone in and target these families. I compare this sometimes to what some companies are doing in regards to healthcare checks, where you go in and you get your BMI and you get your blood pressure and your heart rate and all of that. They're doing that as a benefit to their employees, but they're also doing that as a way to target people who might have some health conditions that need to be, have some preventative work done to prevent them from escalating. And so that is similar to what we're doing here in selective. We're using data at the time of finalization to really target families. There are two sites that are working in the selective interval, that is Illinois and New Jersey. Both of them have decided to focus on teens. Illinois is implementing something called Target, and New Jersey is implementing tuning into teens, and John will tell us about that very soon on this webinar. You're going to see the same poll now, so if you could again just take a minute to fill out this poll so that we can see how people feel the provision of services is in regards to the selective interval. Okay, I'm not surprised that majority of respondents have typed in week for this particular interval. I don't feel like this is an interval that we oftentimes focus on in child welfare, so it'll be exciting to see what Illinois and New Jersey are able to find there with their intervention. Okay, the next one we're going to move on to, next interval, is indicated. Families that fall into this particular interval have started to experience some difficulty. They may have reached out for assistance and have been asking some questions and need a referral, or they may have become aware, the child welfare system may become aware of them through their interaction with maybe an outreach program or an entity that's involved with families. The key in this particular interval is that you want to get services in place that prevent the situation from escalating. So these families are not in a crisis situation, but it's certainly at a level that requires something more than a resource and referral or a standardized training. These families are needing something a little bit more immediate, and they're going to need something that really is going to tap into the risk factors that they're currently experiencing and trying to prevent them from moving to any other type of higher escalation. We have one site that's working in this interval, and it's Wisconsin, and they're actually developing a new program that's called Adoption and Guardianship Enhanced Support for Ages. So I'm now going to ask people to do the same thing on this poll, is if you can fill out how you feel your system does in regards to provision of services that would fall into indicated. And while people are filling that out, I should mention that I'm really breezing through these very quickly. We have a document online that provides 5 pages for each interval that goes much more in depth in regards to the practice principles, intervention examples, and the population. So I encourage you to check those out on our website. For the purposes of today, we're just doing a quick overview. Okay, so for indicated, we have the highest percentage, which is almost 41%, is weak, followed next by sufficient at 36%. Okay, the last interval that I'm going to go over today is intensive. And intensive is really where the families are in crisis. So in this particular interval, these families may have already experienced discontinuity or they're at the threshold of experiencing it. So the key for this interval is how do you provide services immediately, because you have to diminish the crisis that's currently at hand, but you also then have to work on strengthening the family and repairing the damage that's already been done and setting in support that will prevent the crisis from reoccurring. So different sites refer to intensive differently. Certainly I know in Illinois they refer to it as bring the bus, meaning they're ready to have the child picked up. But intensive is at the crisis, and of course we would like to try to prevent cases from moving to the crisis level by having service and supports all along the continuum, but sometimes it's hard to avoid. We have one site who's focused on this, and it's Tennessee, and they are implementing the neurosequential model of therapeutics, also called NMT. So on this next slide, I'm going to ask sites to rate their site in regards to the provision of services and supports that fall into intensive. I can tell people are getting tired of polls because less results are coming in now. Okay, so weak is the highest here at almost 43%, followed by sufficient at 29%, but very weak, I also want to point out, is quite high here at 22%. So again, if sites are interested, if participants are interested in getting the results of these polls, let me know because we will get this to you. I've already mentioned the 8 partner sites, and the intervals that they're going to be focusing on, but this slide kind of summarizes everything that I've mentioned along the way. So 2 for focused, 1 for universal, 2 for selective, 2 for indicated, and 1 for intensive. Now that's just where they're going to be focusing for their valuable intervention. We will be working with all these sites on enhancing their continuum across all the intervals. And this slide then lists, which I've also mentioned already, the interval, the site, and the intervention that they have selected. And as I mentioned today, we'll be hearing from Vermont and also New Jersey about the interventions they have selected. I am now going to turn it over to Elizabeth Richmond.
Thank you, Melinda. As Melinda said, my name is Elizabeth Richmond, and my husband and I have been adoptive parents for 23 years now, so we have lots of experiences sort of at all ends of the continuum. When you think about working with adoptive families, it's actually a very complicated dynamic. And if we move to the next slide, I really think this kind of summarizes how we feel as adoptive families. We want to be left alone. We want to be treated as normal families, but yet we need help, and we don't know how to get that help. When you think about the process of adoption, some families have, as they go through foster care, have struggled to get to that point of adoption with court delays, maybe changes in caseworkers, maybe struggles along that way that make them feel very competitive and to hold their child to themselves. And so again, that makes it very difficult for them wanting to engage and ask for help. Some families actually do a very nice job at integrating their child into their world and don't think to actually come back to the state services for assistance or help because they think of them as just being like their other children. And so it's a difficult breakthrough to get families to want to engage with you and to maybe admit that they need help, especially if it was a difficult time getting an adoption done, to actually turn back to the state and say, I need help now, is a difficult, maybe embarrassing, and a struggling opportunity for parents. When we look at the continuum on the next slide, it's important to remember that we need to build trust with adoptive families across this continuum, starting when we first work with our foster and potential adoptive parents all the way through all the issues that they might have. It's important that families feel like they can call and not be judged and be expected to get help. When we look at the next slide, engagement, again, has something that you really need to think about at the beginning. As we've begun to do some of this work and done some presentations at some conferences, it's been interesting to hear how states do and don't engage adoptive families. I really encourage every site, whether you're an agency or a county or a state-run system, to have some form of an adoption advisory council. In Illinois, I'm really lucky. We've had an adoption advisory council for 15 years that is fully supported by the state. But it can also be something just as simple if you're county-based or just a single agency of gathering together adoptive families that are willing to come. Typically, if you buy pizza and say, I want to hear what you have to say, families are willing to come back and engage you. By having an adoption advisory council, you can really get people to give you input into how you're providing services, how they want to receive services, and what they find to be helpful. Another useful tool is either a newsletter or a Facebook or a blog or some sort of interaction that goes across the continuum that families maybe start to get when they're fostering, that is information about foster care and adoption in it, that again is something that continues the entire time that they're engaged in services in foster care all the way through the time that they receive some sort of adoption subsidy. What adoptive families feel most connected to is articles or stories that they perceive are written by them and to them. And so if an adoptive parent says, you know, I had this issue and this is how I dealt with it, it's something that an adoptive parent really trusts. That peer-to-peer connection is really important for adoptive families when it comes to trust. Another adoptive parent can tell you about a great service and you're much more likely to call than if you get a postcard in the mail about a service. Again, these are our kids now, and we want to make sure that where we're taking them to is a safe place where I'm going to get good services that are helpful to my family. On the next slide, let's talk a little bit about some things that we can do as we get families ready for adoption. When we get to the point of adoption, again, lots of times we perceive that, well, you've been the foster parent maybe, or we placed those kids with you 6 months ago, so you should be aware of what's going on with that child. But what's going on with that child currently may or may not have much to do with what that child is like when they grow and get older. And so it's important to have workers along that can help families utilize their knowledge and their skills to figure out how that child will grow and age and what those issues and disabilities will look like as they get older, and really what services that they might need. And if you have that conversation as they are in the process of adopting to say, well, you know, this issue at 5 looks very different at 15, and at 15 these are some services or supports that might be really helpful for your family. Again, it's that early acknowledgement of asking for help is okay, and that it is a normalized process and we're here to help. Another thing that I think that Illinois does really well, but certainly is able to be done in any state, is we have our families go through about 9 hours of training to finalize an adoption. And so if you can co-train this with an adoptive parent and a staff member that is very knowledgeable about adoption, that's very useful. When you have an adoptive parent that has kind of had children go all the way through to adulthood and can talk about the normal need of needing help and that it's okay to ask for help, that's very, very useful. Another way of doing this, if you have any other kind of training or in-service, is having adoptive parents come in and speak to those groups. So again, they see people that they can connect to, that they trust, that are asking for help, and that makes it okay. When adoptive families are in the middle of the adoption, they're very excited. They're eager to be their own family and to be away from the child welfare services. So if you can leave participants with some sort of booklet or resources or places they can come back to get help, I always encourage my adoptive families to put that information with their adoption paperwork of finalization so that when they are needing assistance, that's easy for them to find. On the next page, I have some information that I found particularly helpful in Illinois that we do on the after or the post-adoption side. Again, we're looking to build programs that are friendly and non-judgmental. It's awful difficult to ask for help for your adopted child. You feel like a failure. You feel like you should have been able to do it. You feel like maybe you raised other children who didn't need help, so what's wrong with you? And so again, that non-judgmental piece of this is extremely important. In Illinois, we had a program called Adoption Preservation Program, and funny enough, our Adoption Advisory Council said we don't actually like the name Adoption Preservation. It makes it sound like we're all about to fall apart. So 2 years ago, we asked for the name to be changed, and the director agreed. And so now we have programs that are called Adoption Support and Preservation Service. And that may seem like a very silly little change, but to an adoptive parent, it really meant a lot that we were asking for support. We weren't telling you we were giving up. We weren't telling you we wanted to be done. We're just telling you we needed a little bit of help. So if you can offer some forms of counseling, educational advocacy, again, support groups, that peer-to-peer contact is really, really very helpful. Adoption services that are in some form that get sent out to families in some interval is really helpful because, again, when children are small and maybe adopted, may be very different than the needs they have when they're in adolescence. all adoptive families that I've ever worked with when we've done focus groups have always talked about wanting things, though, in kind of plain envelopes. It can have the state, return address on it, but they don't want, help for your adoptive family on the outside of it, just like you see like window siding advertisements. We really want to be able to be treated as normal people and open our mail and be able to decide how we're going to engage in services without being constantly reminded that our family was formed in some different kind of way. Most states provide some sort of assistance after adoption through an adoption subsidy, and so again, check stuffers may be a very easy way to engage families with just short pieces of information in ways that they can access either Facebook pages or websites that can help provide them with more information. This last slide that I have in my section was actually created by the QIC, and I think it's very helpful to think about when you are engaging families. If we start in the lower corner, yellow, that talks about the risk of discontinuity, the risk is low. If we have kids that have low needs and we have caregivers that have low capacity, the risk really is pretty low. When we move up into the green section that talks about a child with low need and a caregiver with high capacity, again, the risk is low. What I think is really very interesting is the orange section where your caregiver capacity is high and your child's needs are extremely high. And so I'm always amazed when I interact with families that have kids that are on their way to residential or have these really high-end needs, and yet they're really functioning very well, and all they need is just a small amount of service to help figure out the right way. Obviously, your largest group that is of most concern is when you have a caregiver capacity that's low and you have a child or youth needs that are really high, and so you're having to do a lot of skill building for families. And so as you look at this continuum, I think it's very useful to use this as you think about the programming that you're going to provide to your families. Ingrid, I think our next slide is questions and answers.
Everybody, I'd like to remind you that if you'd like to ask a question or submit comments, you can type in the chat window, which is located in the lower left area of your screen. When you finish typing, just click on the send button to submit your questions or comments. For those who would like to speak directly with presenters, you must join the audio portion of this webinar by calling 1-866-325-7968, provide the conference ID 726-31629, and you get in the questions queue by pressing *1. So I'm going to take chat questions first.
Thank you. And as a reminder, if you'd like to ask an audio question, please do so by pressing *1. And we will pause for a moment to compile the Q&A roster.
So we have a question. Are the contact people at each site able or willing to describe interventions to interested parties?
I'll answer that. This is Melinda. Yes, I think there are people, we call them SIMs, they're Site Implementation Managers, each of the sites who would be more than willing to share their interventions and what they're doing. I would also encourage you to look on our QIC-AG website. We have site profile documents that are up for each of our 8 partner sites that explain their target population, what they're going to be implementing for the intervention, and the outcomes they hope to achieve. So that's one place you can go immediately. And then you can also get connected with the site, the SIMs, and there's contact information on the website that you can reach out to us and we can make sure you get connected.
All right, and
So
there's an audio question.
So Julie is asking, how often does the Adoption Advisory Council meet and how many members are there?
So we meet 8 times a year. We meet 6 times in person and twice in the year by conference call, just because of the weather in Illinois is very unpredictable in the wintertime. And we have, we actually divided our state into 5 regions, and so we have 2 or 3 adoptive parent representatives from each of the different parts of Illinois, so southern region, central region, northern region, and then Cook County is divided into a couple different pieces. We also have slots for professionals, so it's adoptive parents, and then we have slots for 6 professionals with expertise in the area of adoption, and then we have 6 slots for adult adoptees, feeling like that was an important part of the feedback to have also. when we look at our representation, we try and have good representation across adoption versus guardianship, because in Illinois we treat them the same. And so it's been very successful. We take nominations both through the newsletter, so anyone can nominate themselves and apply to be on it. We also take nominations from staff so that we continue to get good diversity.
So this question actually is directed toward Melinda. Are there any communities in the country that are close to implementing all 8 intervals?
That's a hard question to answer, Greg, because I don't think we know about every single community out there. But I would say that overall, there are not very many communities that are implementing each of interventions in each of these intervals in a really robust way. I think there are some sites that are coming close to that, that have quite a few of these intervals matched. The one that we usually find that is missing the most is selective. Selective tends to be one of those intervals that is oftentimes currently not being provided. So I'd be happy to talk to you more, or to other people who are interested in learning about some of the sites either that we're working with or that we've come across in regards to their continuum.
And before we move on in the presentation, I would like to, someone asked about the PowerPoint for this webinar. It will be sent to you in a follow-up email, so you will get a copy of this PowerPoint. Okay, I'd like to now introduce John Webb. He's the Site Implementation Manager for the New Jersey Department of Children and Families QIC-AG project. And John, take it away.
Okay, Ingrid, thank you very much. As Ingrid said, I'm here in New Jersey, so I'm happy to be a part of this as the Site Implementation Manager for our project. New Jersey has chosen the selective component of the service continuum to focus on due to our ongoing commitment and efforts to support our adoptive and KLG families who have committed to some of our most challenging youth. For many years, New Jersey's Department of Children and Families Office of Adoption Operations has worked to increase the number of adoptions of our older and longest waiting youth. We feel a strong responsibility to these families by way of positioning our agency to be ready and prepared with appropriate and relevant services to meet their needs as they move through their adoption journey. New Jersey is implementing an intervention within the selective interval of the QIC-AG Permanency Continuum Framework. The selective interval includes prevention interventions that focus on outreach to families with risk factors for post-permanency discontinuity. Selective interventions use proactive outreach to engage families in programs or trainings before a specific need is indicated. Prevention efforts focus on enhancing protective factors by increasing specific knowledge, attitudes, and skills. When warranted, selective interventions can include proactively linking families to supports or services. The Continuum Framework is supporting our families in New Jersey. Our hope is that partnering with the QIC-AG on this project will allow us to continue ongoing efforts to enhance support to post-adoption and kinship families, and to continue our efforts to expand the adoption lens of the community mental health community. Next slide, please. As you can see from this slide, our existing service array is quite expansive, something we are very proud of here in New Jersey. We have worked really hard over the past 20 years to establish a strong post-adoption and guardianship program. We hope our involvement with the QIC-AG will enhance these services for families. We expect our work in the selective interval to provide another layer or resource for our families while we continue to monitor the best practices from each interval. Looking at our post-adoption and guardianship work on a continuum has helped us look at the big picture as it relates to services available to all of our families. New Jersey has a very strong post-adoption counseling program, and we work very closely with NJ Arch, which is New Jersey's Adoption and Guardianship Clearinghouse. Another highlight is our Adoption and Guardianship Subsidy Program, which supports and assists over 15,000 families in New Jersey. Again, we are really proud of our services as usual, which makes partnering with the QIC-AG all the more appealing as it gives us a chance to really focus in on areas where we feel we can improve. Next slide, please, Ingrid. there's our bucket. We took time to consider which bucket we would end up in, and ultimately determined that the selective interval was the place for us. We looked at a lot of factors in determining which interval to select, and were guided with the assistance of our QIC-AG site consultants who helped us use two tools, the continuum assessment and the population assessment. That gave us a different way of assessing our current system. These assessments, coupled with a strong commitment from DCF administration, gave us the push to choose the selective bucket. There were a lot of considerations that led us down this path. We assessed the strengths of our current services and interventions that are offered to our target population. Naturally, we looked also at what services were missing for our families, and then if there were outside interventions that could possibly fill those voids. We tried to be realistic about what our agency could support and how that aligned in the continuum framework. Same goes for our population. We did not want to land in a bucket and develop an intervention, ultimately to have it be something our families could not access. We used data to assess risk factors and determine which families are more likely to need support, and our hope is those families would respond to an intervention if it was easily accessible. The data also helped determine our target population. That is inclusive of families that meet a specific criteria. In our case, the criteria is families with children who are currently between 10 and 13 years old, whose caregivers are receiving an adoption or kinship legal guardianship subsidy, and are not open for services with the department. In addition, families must meet one of the following criteria at the time of adoption or guardianship finalization. Either the child was between the ages of 6 and 13 years old, or while the child was in foster care system, he or she was placed in group care. We are really excited to be working with this population and are really energized by the fact that our interval is focused on proactive service and support. This gave us the freedom to select an intervention, which I'll talk about on the next slide, that is preventative in nature and provides families a forum for discussion with other families in similar situations. Next slide. To introduce tuning into teens as the chosen intervention. I say introduce because tuning into teens, or TINT as I will call it, is not currently utilized in the United States. It is an Australian model developed out of the University of Melbourne. This model is used in a number of different places throughout Australia and Europe, but has not yet landed in New Jersey until we start our first class next week. The project will implement and test the effectiveness of the Tuning into Teens intervention, which is a model for teaching parents the techniques of mindful emotion coaching and to engage with their adolescents. The project will compare families who receive TINT with families who receive services as usual, and will test whether TINT is effective in reducing post-permanency discontinuity and increasing well-being of parents and youth. TINT is expected to help prepare parents to support their teens in managing the complex developmental tasks of adolescents by developing the youth's emotional intelligence. Participating families will be randomly assigned to the intervention group. Families assigned to the intervention group will receive TINT. The project will include families who have adopted or obtained guardianship of children through the public child welfare system, as well as families formed through private, domestic, or international adoption. We are really excited to partner with the private adoption community here in New Jersey and expect the relationship between our state agency and the private adoption community to continue to build over the course of the next 3 years. Next slide, please. TINT is a 7-session emotion coaching program designed to proactively increase parents' capacity to understand and respond effectively to their child's emotions, and thereby help their child to develop and improve emotional competence. Such improvements of positive outcomes, including strengthening the attachment of the caregiver-child dyad. Under the supervision of the purveyor, the TINT model will be adapted to ensure the curriculum addresses the special dynamics common to families formed by adoption and guardianship, and what parent couldn't use some assistance in these areas. When you boil it down, TINT'S philosophy asks parents to not be reactive to behaviors and to not immediately problem-solve situations for youth. This is not a traditional parenting class that teaches parents when, how, and where to use timeout. It does much more. It will help families understand that emotions are central for communication and connection between family members, that behavior problems decrease when parents or caregivers understand the teen's emotional world and respond to their emotions, that TINT provides approaches and strategies that are offered to increase connection between parents and teens, that TINT emphasizes emotional awareness with understanding and regulation being key skills that are taught. TINT says that one size does not fit all. Parents can choose what works for their family. It's also a model designed to help parents increase the emotional intelligence of their preteens, and does this by using an emotion coaching methodology. One key point that the purveyor has stressed is that utilizing the TINT philosophy does not have to replace your current parenting style. It's often very difficult for parents to make changes in parenting style, especially with a parent's own upbringing and history playing such a large role on the way a parent raises a child. The skills taught in TINT can be gradually implemented into a parent's repertoire, and as the parent feels more comfortable using the skills, they will be more likely to utilize them. Next slide, please, Ingrid. The workshop setting is important. We've selected locations to hold our trainings that are welcoming to parents. We don't want the location, venue, or logistics to become an obstacle to parents who commit to attending TINT. We expect the workshops to also act as a networking and social connection opportunity to parents who are interested in connecting with other adoptive parents. TINT is a manualized workshop program, but it gives the group the opportunity to organically move the discussion into areas of concern or success, allowing for additional time to be spent on key issues that the families bring up. Inside the workshops, we hope the program will help parents to do a number of things: to understand the relationship between their children's emotions and their behavior, to support their children to manage strong emotions and deal with conflict, to use their children's emotional experiences as an opportunity for closeness and teaching, to gain awareness and learn to regulate their own emotions, to develop skills to assist children to verbally label their emotions, to develop skills to assist children in problem solving, and to guide children's behavior with appropriate limits. Next slide, please. TINT has been rigorously tested in Australia, where it was developed, and replicated in other countries. Here in New Jersey, the intervention will be evaluated through a randomized controlled trial. However, TINT has not been explicitly tested with a post-permanency population. We made the decision early on in the intervention selection process that we would want to enhance whatever intervention we selected by including an adoption and kinship overlay into the intervention. For our purposes, this meant that we would be sure to support the unique needs that our post-permanency families have. To do this, we formed an adoption work group which was charged with making thoughtful and meaningful additions to the TINT manual, which came in the form of an overlay used by the workshop facilitators as an enhancement to the core TINT curriculum. The adaptation work group consisted of parents and professionals from the private and public adoption world. This group and the overlay it created was supported during the entire process by TINT'S purveyor, who participated directly in the development of the adaptations. Our expected short and long-term outcomes position us in a way that gives us a framework for sustainability. The hope being that if this model is successful, we will have had built in the capacity to sustain the project for the long term. We're really excited about the prospects of tuning into teens and can't wait to see it be implemented in the coming weeks. Next slide, please, and I think this is our Q&A. Thank you, everyone.
So we will now open it up for your questions and comments, and if you'd like to submit a chat question, you can use the chat window which is located in the lower left of your screen. When you're finished typing, click the send button. If you'd like to ask your questions of the presenters, you must be dialed in over the phone by calling 866-325-7968. Use the conference ID 726-31629 and then press *1 on your keypad.
Thank you. And again, that's *1 to ask an audio question. We will pause for a moment to compile the Q&A roster. There are no audio questions.
Thank you very much, Evelyn. Martha has a question. She'd like to know in what areas and how many families will TINT work with.
That's a great question. Our state is looking to provide this intervention statewide. So we will be doing our randomized controlled trial over the next New Jersey, and we hope to work with over 250 families during our time. That's our goal, of course. So we're gonna aim to get there.
Sean is asking, what are the key strengths and impediments to implementation of TINT in New Jersey?
That's a great question. And one of the ones that, right off the top, is communication with our purveyor. Because she is in Australia, that has become a bit of an obstacle, which we're challenged to work on. A lot of our calls with her occur later in the night here in East Coast time, which is early in the morning the following day for her. So that's more of a logistics challenge. The message getting out to our families has been a challenge that we're really working on and proud of how we've done. And lastly, I think just the awareness that this is a different training model than maybe other things that are out there has been an important strength of our program.
Okay, we will now move on in our presentation. I'd like to introduce Barbara Joyle. She's the System of Care Unit Director for the Family Services Division of the State of Vermont Department of Children and Families. She will present on the Vermont Permanency Continuum.
So happy to be able to join you today to share a little bit about Vermont and our perspective on the Permanency Continuum and the QIC-AG initiative. Next slide, Ingrid. Thought I'd start with a few little fast facts about Vermont. We are a very small little state in New England. We have 626,000 residents at this point. It always made me giggle when I heard about some of our other sites who have that many folks in one city and lots more than that. And so some of the implementation challenges that we face look very, very different here than they do in other jurisdictions. I will share that Vermont is an incredibly rural state. We have a mountain range that runs down the center, which sometimes complicates some of our ability to deliver services in our crazy winters. We have our largest population center of 42,000. So that just to give you a little bit of information about the scale of that we're working on here. One of the things interesting about Vermont is that we are a state that is really lacking in racial diversity. And I mentioned that to point out that, for our families who are adopting transracially, that creates some additional challenges for them as they help to support their young person in their homes and schools and communities. Vermont has an integrated child welfare system, which addresses both child abuse and neglect population as well as the juvenile justice involved youth. And our current caseload of young people in our care is about 1,350. Vermont is in the middle of an opiate epidemic, and we've had about a 30% rise in the number of new custody cases hitting our system. And for the first time ever, the population of 0 to 5 has surpassed our adolescent population for children in care. And so I'm telling you that because there are obviously implications for us around our recruitment of families who, potentially will be able to provide permanency, And it's just a very different lens that we're looking through at this point in time. We have approximately 2,100 children receiving federal adoption assistance or guardianship assistance at this time. Many of this, that represents about 1,400 families. Many of our families have more than one child, and we're finding a real rise in the number of sibling groups, large sibling groups that are coming to our attention. And we finalize approximately 175 adoptions annually. Next slide, please. I'm really proud of Vermont's tradition in adoption, and our roots here run very deep. I did a little bit of digging, and I found an old document that pointed to the fact that in 1853, Vermont enacted its first adoption code, and we were the second state in the nation to do so. Next slide, Ingrid. Shortly after that period in time, Vermont got hit with a influenza epidemic, and that took hold of the whole New England area. And it left a lot of kids without one or both of their parents. Prior to this period in time, there hadn't been any real research completed on the welfare of children in Vermont. And in an effort to gain understanding of how this epidemic affected the needs of children and families, the Vermont Children's Aid Society was established. VCAS opened its doors in 1919 in an effort to support children in need. VCAS did outreach to what was the overseers of the poor at that time to help them find and support foster and boarding homes for children. Their hope was to help to stabilize the birth family home with services and monetary support so the children could remain with their birth families. Your question, well, why would she talk about that? One of the things that's really unique and pretty special of Vermont is the deep roots, as I mentioned. Vermont Children's Aid Society became one of the underpinning organizations in our state that really focused on advocacy and supporting families formed by adoption from the beginning. This agency was in existence until the early 2000s when it closed its doors, unfortunately, due to financial issues. And VCAS was integral and forward-thinking as a partner to the adoption community in Vermont, and really helped us to move forward in the development of what we now think about as our permanency continuum. Next slide, please. In that same tradition, we'll introduce you to the Elizabeth LUND home. In Vermont and across our nation, maternity homes were originally created as rehabilitative resources for unmarried pregnant women. Most maternity homes were operated by religious organizations as a place where unmarried pregnant women could receive parenting and job training skills so they could support and parent their child or children. In 1890, the Vermont legislature passed a bill brought forth by 10 women for the Women's Christian Temperance Union to allow for the incorporation of a body called, unfortunately, the Home for Friendless Women. Sometime later, through a giant gift from a physician in our area, this became known as the Elizabeth LUND Home. And this institution was created for caring for poor and women in need, to provide them with the means of support where they can enjoy the comforts and advantages of a quiet, peaceful home. This entity is important to our tradition because Elizabeth LUND Home, known now as LUND, continues to this day to serve pregnant and parenting women and works very closely in partnership with the state of Vermont to find permanency for children in need. As I started reading about adoption nationally and adoption in our state, I just found this stuff fascinating, so I thought I would just share a little bit with you. Next slide, please. In Vermont, a major strategy for the building of our permanency continuum came as a result of some very heavy lifting from a number of committed professionals in the adoption world, some of them from Vermont Children's Aid and also from LUND. Vermont was awarded several adoption opportunity grants through the 1990s to build a post-permanency support system and to create a strategy for rural recruitment and retention through the creation of Project Family, which has focused on identifying permanent homes for waiting children. This project has continued to this day. It's been a 16-year public-private partnership that has done just amazing things to move children who are waiting to permanency. One of the things that happened, and other states will probably affirm this, when you have a grant and the funding ends, a lot of times the programming that was driven by that funding starts to get shaky and is in jeopardy. And so part of what we recognized very early on is that we needed to attend to sustainability issues from the beginning of these grants. And through many hours of family members and our nonprofit partners advocating at our legislature, these programs were allowed to continue to exist and, in fact, have been able to grow over time through those efforts. Next slide, please. A little bit of more information about Vermont. This is just a few steps through kind of our journey to the development of what we feel is a pretty robust permanency continuum. In 1993, we had a visionary join the ranks of the Vermont Department for Children and Families, and she stepped into the role of what was known then as adoption chief, and her name is Diane Dexter. And Diane recently retired, and these programs and this continuum really is her legacy. So if any of you on this line know Diane, you will absolutely understand what I'm talking about. She had been a child protection worker and a juvenile probation officer in our system for a few years. And during her first week in her role, a woman and fellow visionary from QIC Family Services tapped her on the shoulder and said, "Post-adoption services. Once you get settled, give me a call." So Diane went about learning her new job and discovered that families who had adopted from foster care or families who had adopted internationally children who had previously lived in orphanage faced many, many struggles as they were getting older. And so she started to really pay attention to that. At that same time, in a little remote part of our state in the Northeast Kingdom, way up on the Canadian border, there was a gentleman who ran therapeutic foster care programs through the Community Mental Health Center. And one day he reached out to Diane and said, "There's something going on up here. All of these foster families are adopting their children, and we're seeing these themes over and over. The kids are really come from various backgrounds, and the parents come from various backgrounds, but the themes are still the same, and what can we do?" And so he was just looking for some suggestions. So Diane remembered the conversation that the card that had been given to her by her peer, and phoned her up, and the three of them together collaborated and advocated and were given a very tiny little pot of money from Title IV-B Subpart 2 Family Preservation Funds, and our first post-adoption support work was born, and that came in the form of a lending library and a couple of support groups where families were drawn together. From those families, we learned that their experience with our local community mental health was really challenging because those practitioners were not trauma-informed, nor were they adoption competent, and so they applied this lens of something that didn't fit to these families, and so families were very frustrated because they just didn't feel like this was meeting their needs. And so as a result of that, we started to create post-permanency support programs across our state, and I'll tell you more about that after a little bit. So with that little trip down memory lane, we come to the current state of affairs. And Melinda, if you can advance to the next slide. You saw this slide before. The star notes where Vermont is in the continuum. And now we've seen the implementation of the ASFA law. We've seen the implementation of fostering connections. And we've seen a tremendous growth in the number of families formed by adoption and through guardianship in Vermont. And like many other places in the country, we have more children receiving adoption assistance or guardianship assistance than we do have in foster care, and we really celebrate that, and we expect that that population will continue to grow. And we know that we need to be resourced in a way that anticipates that. So that's one piece of why our ability to look at this entire continuum is really important to us. We need to keep building as the needs of families keep growing and the number of families that come to our attention keep growing. So in the front end of the system, we offer training and support en route to finalization, as well as training and support post-finalization. And what we found here is, we offer a lot of this, and it's tricky for families to access it. Maybe it's because they're busy getting about the business of parenting their kids and meeting their needs, and so adding that extra layer is a challenge. We also have, in Vermont, the capacity to have created a fluid transition from pre-finalization to post-finalization by introducing our post-permanency workers to the families that they will ultimately be working with if the family so desires after the legal finalization. It's sort of a warm handoff process that families have really, really appreciated, so that they don't have to wonder, if I need help, how am I going to get it? They have a name and a connection. We've also found that many families finalize their adoption or guardianship after a period, a long period of time, extended period of time to get through the process. And similar to what Elizabeth shared, a lot of these families, have had enough of the system by the time their adoptions are finalized. They've had enough of the regulations. They've had enough of all of that, and they're just wanting to get on with being the business of being a family. We do have a process here in Vermont where the finalization agency, which is LUND, does a quarterly check-in for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and 12 months. But after that period of time, we begin to have more limited or no contact with families, and that's a real problem, because we know that, over the lifetime of a family, there are going to be, normative developmental points in time where they do need additional support. And so by that dropping off at that stage creates a real disconnect and sort of a cliff for families. We also have a pretty, I guess I'll say, libertarian approach to families and their rights. And so we haven't been very assertive in reaching out to families and knocking on their door and trying to get a grip on what they need and how they're doing and well-being issues. And what we've heard from families over and over again is that, we do a lot of work before to share information and to, orient them to what to expect, but they can't take all of that in. They often tell us, if I knew then what I know now, I would be in a really different place. And so that has been a challenge for a lot of families. And so I think we can switch to the next slide, Ingrid. This, and I apologize for this painful amount of contact on this slide and the next one. This is similar to the slide that you saw in John's presentation. Vermont also completed a continuum assessment where we looked at all of the intervals and the services that were available. And we found through our continuum assessment that it appears we have a pretty robust system of care. But we also know that since we have not been universally reaching out to families after finalization, we're likely missing some details overall about the well-being of these families and their changing needs. So this really highlights the piece of work that Vermont is doing around the universal prevention interval. Next slide, please. Again, sorry, painful slide. This is the logic model that we have created around our intervention. And what we are doing is a survey to all families post-finalization, both guardians and those families formed by adoption, who receive subsidies. So all families are going to receive this survey where we're asking just a series of questions about their early experiences moving on to adoption, their finalization experience, and then over, some of the families will have adopted several years back. And so we're looking to see, like, how are they doing? What's going well for them? What are some of the strengths that make things continue to be stable for them? And we're hoping that by collecting this information, we're going to be able to see, who is able to access services locally to them. Where are some of the gaps in our services? What do we know about the service providers? Do people understand the needs of these families? And then we'll be able to look at our system and more ably figure out how to fill those gaps. There are other initiatives going on in Vermont with a trauma cluster grant where they're looking at developing adoption and trauma competence across our system. So I'm hoping that when these two projects kind of converge, we're going to have even more robust services available. One of the things about a survey, it's not a terribly sexy intervention, but we feel like it will provide us that opportunity to reconnect with families. So we're reaching out across our system to collect updated information. A lot of families now get their adoption subsidy reimbursements through direct deposit, so sometimes our addresses are not current. And we don't have a really great system for making sure that we're able to reach them systematically. So we're hoping that this project will provide that so that we can sustain it over the long haul and have sort of natural points in time that we are reaching out to families. We have several strategies for how to increase our response rate because we know we need to reach a large number of families in order to really understand what their ongoing needs are and to understand, what are the things that that contribute to families being successful. And our intent is that that information will inform us of how to perhaps make some changes at the front end of our system around matching or support or even assessment of young people's needs. So we're really hoping that that's going to help us. The other piece that the process of assessing the continuum has had is that it's making me recognize lots of other places within our system where we could apply this lens of assessing the entire continuum of services. For example, we're in the process now of having to revamp our foster parent recruitment and retention efforts, and I think that this continuum model would be something that we could also perhaps apply to that implementation process. Next slide, please. There we go. So the question, why is it important for states and tribes and counties and child welfare and private agencies to provide this continuum of services to families? And our philosophy here in Vermont is that this is really sacred work that we're doing, the putting together of families. And we make a commitment to them that we'll support them, they won't be alone in this process, and we'll help them to be successful. And so to me, it's a matter of principle, following through on those commitments and making good on our promises. And as professionals, we know a lot about what can happen, and I believe that we owe it to the children who have likely been the most traumatized before they came to their new families. We need to give them and their parents, all of them, the best chance of healing and growing strong that we can. And we believe that high-quality services along the continuum delivered by committed and competent partners and available in a timely fashion has a central role to play in that. And that's the lens that we're looking at the permanency continuum through. So thank you, and I'm going to hand it back to you, Ingrid.
So we're going to take a quick minute to invite you to submit your questions and comments. You can submit them in the chat window, or you can call in to speak with our presenters directly. So we do have one question, Barb. Gail would like to know if she can receive a copy of the Vermont Adoptive Family Survey.
The Vermont Adoption Family Survey is still in its design phase. We're pretty close to wrapping that up. We haven't done any testing on that, and it will be a tool that will become available, but we're not quite at that place yet.
And Evelyn, did you have any phone questions that we needed to address?
And there are no phone questions at this time.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Melinda Liss for our closing.
Real quick before people get off, because I know we're running out of time for our webinar today, I want to thank all the panelists for presenting. I thought it provided a nice overview of what's taking place in the site, and I appreciate the questions people asked. A couple of reminders. The webinar has been recorded and will be available. We will have the PowerPoint slides available as well. I know people have expressed that. The video that we watched is also something you can get off right now and download from our QIC-AG website, and we encourage you to utilize that in your site. On the next slide, we have our QIC-AG website. If you're not familiar with it, this is where you can go to access all the different resources and services that I mentioned. So we have the QIC-AG Permanency Continuum Framework. We have the site-specific papers. We also have the QIC-AG Intervention and Program Catalog, so you can go in there and type different types of characteristics and come up with programs that we have found across the nation that are applicable to our continuum. So we encourage you to use that as well. We also have a listserv that you can join, so if you want to get notice of when things are available, such as the Vermont survey or other documents that are ready for release, we encourage you to sign up on that listserv so that we don't email you very often. So when things come out, we do make sure to let you know. And I do want to reiterate before we close that we, with the QIC-AG, we are working with Target Group 2. It does include intercountry adoptions and private domestic adoptions. So New Jersey, who spoke today, will be integrating that population into their intervention, as will many of the other sites that are working on that intervention. The last slide, just to remind everybody that we have a survey that's going to pop up in just a few minutes, and you'll get one more reminder after the webinar. Please do take the time to fill that out. It's quick and easy, and it helps us to know what information you would like in the future and what can be done better, because we do want to, all the stuff that we're learning through this 5-year cooperative agreement, we need to get out there to sites across the nation. So with that, I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and this will conclude our webinar.